Good morning, everyone. So today I thought we'd talk about the whole gender thing. And so to start off, I have been studying logical fallacies for about the last year now. And I have compiled like an 85 page document of a whole bunch of different fallacies and tactics to manipulate people, to trick yourself. And it's been very eye-opening to learn all this. And one thing that I noticed in all this is that when it comes to the topic of this whole like gender thing that's going around here, there's both sides obviously use a lot of fallacies, and I wanted to highlight some of the fallacies that are very critical for this whole gender debate, or at least for one side of this whole gender debate. Now, again, both sides use fallacies. It's terrible, but they do. And so I wanted to talk about, I wanted to go over some of them because I think it's just important for people to be aware of what's happening when they're hearing a debate about it, or when they're having an exchange with somebody, or to even know, a lot of people don't even know what they're talking about. And so I have a list of more primary fallacies that this is operating upon, and I wanted to go over them and explain them. But before I can do that, I need to make a clarification, because recently, and I mean like within the last month, I looked up the words, because I was talking with a friend of mine. I looked up the words, the definition of the word gender and the definition of the word sex. And when I did that, I learned something very interesting. So I took this straight from Google. So this is Oxford Definitions, or Oxford Dictionary, whatever it is that Google uses. I just typed in the word sex, definition, gender definition, and this is what came up for the word. So the word sex, this is the definition: either of two main categories, male and female, into which humans and most other living things are divided on the basis of their reproductive system. That's the definition for the word sex, okay? Either of two main categories, male and female, into which humans and most other living things are divided on the basis of their reproductive system. So based off of human anatomy, that determines whether or not you're male or female. Okay, and that's what the word sex means. Now, the word gender. Listen to this very closely. Having understanding what the word sex means, let's look at what the word gender means. This is the definition of gender from Oxford Dictionaries. It says, the male or female sex. Now, what is sex? It's male or female based off of the reproductive system. Okay, here's the word gender. The male or female sex, especially when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. Now, those two definitions do not mix, okay? Sex is male or female based off of human reproductive system, and gender is male or female, especially when it has nothing to do with your reproductive system. These two words are causing a lot of confusion, needless confusion, because for at least as long as I've grown up, the words sex and gender were virtually interchangeable. There may have been some mild differences, but I didn't necessarily know what they were. However, when you look at these words as they are in the dictionary, the word gender doesn't make sense, because it's like, yeah, the male or female sex, especially when it has nothing to do with your reproductive system, even though male and female is determined by your reproductive system, okay? Now let me read you the rest of the definition to the word gender. This is a part that I don't believe existed in older dictionaries, but this is a newer one, right? So let me read to you the whole definition of the word gender again. The male or female sex, especially when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones, or one of a range of other identities that do not correspond to established ideals of male and female. Okay, there's the new part. Okay, but my point is that when we're talking about this whole gender debate, or this, gender debate, I guess you would call it, we need to understand the differences between the words sex and gender, because if you don't, you will be talking about two different things. You and whoever you're talking with or debating with, you're going to be talking about different things, and you're not even going to know it, okay? So you need to make sure that you're selecting your word properly, and you should probably clarify your terms because everybody's going to be using these words a little bit differently, probably. Now let's go ahead and get into some of the fallacies that are being used a lot in this gender debate. One is, obviously, the appeal to authority. And I'm going to be only covering some of the big fallacies that are being used that are critical. Not so much one, because like people will use cherry picking and red herring and stuff like this, right? I mean, they're just going to do it. The genetic fallacy. They're going to use these fallacies, but there are some fallacies that this whole gender debate kind of hinges on, and those are the ones that I want to look at. But the first one on the list is appeal to authority. Okay, now both sides of the debate use appeals to authority. They're like, well, you know, scientific research shows that whatever. And both sides will do this. Both sides of the equation. And the reason that I don't like the appeal to authority on this, like, I mean, obviously I believe that science is a real thing. But the reality is it comes to which scientists are we referring to? The group that supports the gender movement or the group that disagrees with and doesn't support the gender movement? You see, this is why I would avoid an appeal to authority. Because what it's going to boil down to is which authority, and then it's going to boil down to a fallacy known as confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is basically, because I'm biased to believe a certain way, if there is evidence both way, I'm going to be inclined to believe the evidence that favors my view. That's confirmation bias, okay? And so any appeal to authority that you make in the gender debate, regardless of what side you're on, it's all going to come down to confirmation bias, which you will get nowhere. Because why? You're going to believe the scientists that you want to believe that say what you want to believe, and they're going to believe the scientists that they want to believe that say what they believe, right? So appeal to authority, you just need to kick that one out the window. And I know that may seem kind of like counterintuitive because a lot of this is based off of science and so forth. But the reality is that humans are the ones that are writing these science papers, that are doing these science research and whatnot, and these people are getting funded because, you know, research isn't free. It costs money. Well, who's paying them? Well, it's going to be people that are wanting support for their view, and I'm sure that both sides do it. I can't prove that, but the reality is that is often how this works, unfortunately. Okay, so the next one, and obviously some of these are going to be, you'll notice, are more critical, right? The next one on the list is appeal to equality. Now, for a very long time, there has been an effort for women to be equal to men. They want to be on an equal playing field. And while it may be true that the men and women are equal in many ways, such as value, you know, worth, things like that, there are differences between men and women. And when I say man or woman or what I'm referring to is the definitions that we have here in the dictionary. So I'm going to go ahead and give those to you. Man is an adult male human being. Woman is an adult female human being. Okay, these are the definitions from Google, Oxford Dictionary, so that's what I'm talking about. Let's not get confused here. Okay, but there are differences between men and women, between male and female, and it has to do with their anatomy. Men tend to, because of their biology, be stronger and thus better suited to do jobs that require, you know, more muscle and grunt versus something that women have that can do better, right? So, yes, men and women are equal in many ways, but in some ways they're not. And in those ways that they are not, you have to acknowledge that they're different in those ways. And when you don't, you'll run into problems, which is what we're having now. In a lot of these sports things, the men are identifying or claiming to be female or whatever, and then they're able to get in to women's sports, which is all females, right? And so you have a male in a female sport, and of course they're winning, right? Because why? Well, some sports, I mean, it's about strength, it's about stuff like that, and so the women are going to be beaten, and that's not fair. So yes, while we should push for equality in things such as the value of the man or the woman in the family circle or whatever you want to call it, or value in society or whatever, there are differences and they need to be acknowledged. And when you try to ignore those differences, what you're doing is you're destroying the exception. And that's not cool. So, but that's appeal to equality. You see this in sports. You see problems in sports. You see problems in bathrooms. There's reasons that sometimes things should be different, right? They shouldn't always be equal. All right. Another one is the definist's fallacy. Now, this is kind of critical for the whole gender movement. And the reason for this is because, well, you already saw what the word sex and gender means, and then there's the word woman. Now, I told you what the definition of the word woman was, according to Oxford dictionaries. It is an adult female human being. However, people that are pushing this gender movement, they're using the definist fallacy. And what a definist fallacy is basically you're changing the definition or modifying the definition to suit your view or belief, okay? So an example of this for the gender movement is they're like, if you were to ask them, well, what is a woman? They'll be like, well, a woman is somebody that identifies as a woman. Now, what that is a circular definition, okay? And a circular definition, like when you write, what people that make up the dictionary, they're not supposed to include the word in the word that they're defining. You're not supposed to do that. Because if you do that, it's a circular definition. So if you looked up the word, you know, oxymoron in the definition in the dictionary and it says an oxymoron, it didn't help you figure anything out, okay? And this is a problem with circular definitions, and this is why dictionaries, people who write the definitions, they're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to include the word in the definition. They're not allowed to include the word that they're defining in the definition. Okay, so yeah, when you say a woman is whoever identifies as a woman, that doesn't help you figure out what a woman is. Besides, what exactly are you identifying as? A woman. Okay, well, what is a woman? It's whoever identifies as a woman. Okay, so what are they identifying as? Well, whoever identifies as a woman. That's not specific. That's very ambiguous. That's very useless, ultimately, because you don't really know what a woman is. Now, a woman, according to Oxford dictionaries, this is Google, okay, it says an adult female human being. That's what a woman is, okay? And man is an adult male human being. You can't just change the definition of the word to suit your view. I understand that you want to do that, but you can't actually do it. Now, when you're talking, you want to be like, hey, this is what I mean when I say woman, you can do that because you clarified your terms with them. This becomes a fallacy and a problem when you think that your personal definition is society's standards. That's not reality. You got to go get a dictionary for that, okay? So appeal to authority, appeal to equality, the definist fallacy. Another one is destroying the exception. Okay, so here's an example of people on one side of the whole gender debate. They'll be like, you either have a penis or a vagina, you're male or female, there's no exceptions. And then they'll be like, there's no exceptions. You either have a penis or you have a vagina, no exceptions. Okay, that's not reality. There are exceptions. Now, those exceptions are very rare, but there are exceptions. Some people are born with what is called ambiguous genitalia, and what that means is you cannot tell what their gender is or their sex is. And you notice how I switched that, right? You cannot tell what their sex is based off of looking at their genitals because they're unclear. You can't really tell which it is. Is it a penis? Is it a vagina? Is it both? You can't tell. Okay, and this is a mutation. Now, some people don't like calling it a mutation. They prefer to say, well, it's something they didn't fully develop in the womb, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter to me. The point is that there are exceptions. They are very rare, okay? But there are exceptions, and you can't just say that there's no exceptions. As soon as you do that, the other side is going to be like, okay, so now I know that you're lying. I know that you're like, and then they'll say you're intentionally lying and being willfully deceived, which that may not be the case. You just may be ignorant because you don't know that. Okay, but there are exceptions to most things, and there are exceptions to this whole gender debate. Sometimes they don't have a penis or a vagina, okay? And you have to acknowledge that. It's a very rare occurrence. I would call it a mutation. Some people would call it whatever else. It's fine, but you can't deny the exception. Sometimes there are exceptions, even if you don't like it. So you got to get over yourself. Okay. Another one is distinction without a difference. Now, this is pretty much like any topic ever. All right, but distinction without a difference, I'm going to go ahead and read you the definition because this one always confuses me, and I'll butcher it really bad. Distinction without a difference is, the definition of that is, operates on the premise that two identical things are different when in fact they are not. Okay? And one way that we see this is when it comes to a fact versus an interpretation of the fact. A lot of times when people have a fact and they have a belief, they interpret that fact and they're like, my interpretation of that fact is the fact itself. You can't do that. That's the distinction without a difference fallacy. And people do this with science, with this whole gender debate. For example, well, on either side, they'll be like, okay, so this is science, and so, you know, it's fact. And really what they're meaning is their interpretation of science. Because, let me give you an example on a different topic. Okay, so there are fossilized bones in the dirt, okay? How those bones got there is an interpretation. The fact is that they're in the dirt, and they're fossilized. How they got there is an interpretation. Some people will say a giant meteor hit the Earth and destroyed all life. Some people claim that it was a global flood. Some people will say the dinosaurs farted themselves to extinction. Okay, but all that's an interpretation, okay? There's the fact that the bones are in the dirt, and then there's the interpretation, which is, you know, it was one of all these different things, okay? You can't erase the line between the fact and your interpretation. But that's what happens so heavily in like every topic ever. Okay, so you have to understand that there is a distinction between those two. All right? So people will be like, well, science, you know, indicates that blah, 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 and you're rejecting the facts, you know, regarding the gender. And it doesn't matter which side of the debate you're on. And when the reality is they took the facts of science and they interpreted them, and now they're calling their interpretation the facts. Okay, you can't do that. Another one, this is a big one. This is probably one of the most common fallacies that people use for every topic ever. Is called false equivalence. And false equivalence is basically saying that because things are similar, they are the same. Or because they're similar in one way, they're also similar in other ways. That's what false equivalence is. So people will do this with the words sex and gender. They'll be like, well, this is the definition of sex, and this is the definition of gender, and because they're very similar, they're basically the same, and I can use them interchangeably. Well, you can use them interchangeably, but it's going to cause a problem, okay? I'm trying to think, do I have another example of that? Oh yeah, here. This is a very big one. Somebody will be like, I got fired because of who I choose to love, or I don't like being hated because who I choose to love, or I was kicked out of church because of who I choose to love. And basically what this is an argument put forward by somebody who believes on this gender, that is in favor of the LGBTQ plus movement, or whatever they call themselves. And what they're doing is they're equating love with sex. Okay? Now, I understand that there are some similarities between love and sex, because when you're in romantic love, because there's different types of love, right? Well, when you have romantic love, that can often result in sex, or sex is a result of romantic love, blah, 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 etc., right? So there is some similarities there. However, they are not the same. I think that rape should evidence that love and sex are not the same thing. You know, because rapist obviously doesn't love the person that they're raping, okay? So this is a false equivalence fallacy. You can't be doing this, but this is a very big one. They use it with the words sex and gender too. And when they use it with the words sex and gender, well, these definitions are basically the same, so we use them interchangeably. That's the equivocation fallacy, because the equivocation fallacy is basically false equivalence just regarding words. Okay. The other one is hasty generalization. Now, this is a really big one that the LGBTQ plus movement uses. They'll be like, well, here, let me just find some examples. I wrote some down. Have some here. Okay, so hasty generalization. Okay, so first what that fallacy is it operates on the premise that a small sample should be as reliable as a large sample for extracting general conclusions about a thing, or you're inflating the exception to the point of making it a general rule. So whatever the exception is, you're like saying it's not the exception, that's actually the general rule, and you can't do that, okay? So here's an example of it, and this is something that the LGBTQ movement would be using. For example, some people would say people born with ambiguous genitalia, which I explained what that is, prove that, as a general rule, there are more than two sexes. No, that's a rare exception. You can't say that the rare exception is now the general rule. That's a hasty generalization fallacy. You can't make the exception the general rule. That doesn't, no. Mm-mm. Another one you can use for hasty generalization, because the LGBTQ movement or whatever is a minority. They might think that they're a majority, I don't know, but they are a minority. And because there are some people with, genuine gender mutations or lacking development or whatever you want to call it, that doesn't mean that everybody's like this, okay? Another example that the LGBTQ movement would use in hasty generalization is this one, and I've seen this one before. Also, guevadosis, I don't know how to pronounce this, children, but they're basically children that it'll be a male, it'll be a boy, right? But they don't actually develop a penis until they're 12 years old. They're just born without one, like, for whatever reason, I don't know. So that's what it is, and this is very rare. Okay, it only exists in Las Salinas, a village which is a village in the Dominican Republic, Papua New Guinea, and Turkey. Everywhere else it doesn't exist. Okay, so it's very rare. But the argument is that guevadosis children are labeled female at birth because they don't have a penis, right? But develop a penis at about 12 years old. This proves that we cannot assign sex based on genitals. Okay. No, actually you can assign sex based on genitals. And the reason that you can do that is because the overwhelming majority of the population you can do that with. Just because there is like less than 1% of, or probably less than a half or even 1/4% of the world's population is this, are guevadosis children, that's not, you can't make that a general rule. That can't be the guiding rule for all of the world's population, all the rest of the world's population. You can't do that. Okay, that's another big one. Now, this next one, hugely necessary for the LGBTQ plus movement. It's called the romantic fallacy. Now, the romantic fallacy is basically because you feel something, it must be true. Okay, and I want to read this to you because it may just help. This is what the romantic fallacy is. It says, or the romantic fallacy argues that since a person feels it, it must be true. This fallacy often claims exemption from critique on the grounds that one's feelings are real and valid and are therefore not to be judged or questioned. While it is true that feelings are real and people experience those feelings may not properly be reflecting reality. Okay? So the romantic fallacy, it's arguing that since you feel it, it's true. Okay, now it's true that you're feeling it. That is true. If you're experiencing something, it is real to you because those feelings are real. All right? Your experience is real. But your feelings might not be in harmony with reality. For example, a child may feel like they're in danger because they believe there's a monster under their bed, but the reality is that their feelings are lying to them because they're not in danger. Okay? So the romantic fallacy a lot of the LGBTQ plus movement is based on the romantic fallacy because a lot of it is feeling based. It's feeling driven. It's emotionally driven. I feel like a woman, or I feel like a man, therefore I am. No. No, not according to the definitions of man and woman that are in the dictionaries today. Okay? You may feel, genuinely feel, and experience the world around you with feminine feelings or masculine feelings. That is true, but that does not define, that is not how you define male and female, man and woman. It's not how it's done, okay? So I understand your feelings are real, and I'm not saying they're not real. I'm not saying that you shouldn't take them into consideration when, you know, whatever it is that you're wanting to take into consideration. I'm saying that's not how we do it. Now, I talked with one person about this, who at least purports himself to be very knowledgeable about the topic, and I'm like, well, I asked, how do they figure out, because my opinion of this individual is relatively high, and I'm like, okay, well, if I can't believe that you think that you know, we decide whether or not we're male or female based on our feelings, because that would be, you know, very illogical, right? And this guy is very logical. So I'm like, so how do these trans people determine whether or not they are male or female? And then he was like, well, it's pretty much all based on their feelings because there's nothing else to really base it off of. That's what they told me. Now, maybe he's not right. I don't know, but that does definitely seem to be the case because they don't do any tests. There's no process. It's like, well, if you feel you are, then we must affirm your gender with gender affirming care, right? Yeah, but that's okay. And again, that's the word gender. Okay, so let me just mention this thing about gender for a second. If you remember, gender is male or female sex, which is based off the reproductive system, especially when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. In other words, especially when it has nothing to do with your reproductive system. So social and cultural. In other words, somebody might be like, well, even though I am an adult male with a male's reproductive system, because I feel like staying at home and washing dishes and raising my kids, I must be a woman. Okay? You can do that with the word gender. You cannot do that with the word sex. Okay? So, again, we got to be careful which words we're using there. But yeah, that's the romantic fallacy. There was actually a British man who felt that he was a Korean because, you know, he really liked Koreans. He just felt like he was a Korean, and so he had all these plastic surgeries done to change his face so that way his eyes, you know, would do the whole like Asian thing, right? And he's not Asian. He's not Korean. He's British. Your feelings do not change your nationality. Your feelings do not change your sex. It doesn't. Now, if we're going to use the word gender, okay, yeah, sure. If gender truly has nothing to do with biology, which is what this definition is, then okay, sure. You can be an adult male that stays home and washes dishes and takes care of the kids. That doesn't make you female. Okay? That means you are a male doing that which socially has been considered something that a female would do. But you are still a male. Okay, you have to understand that. The definitions of words do not change because of your feelings or your ideologies or your beliefs or views or whatever you want to call them. The definitions of the word that society operates upon are in the dictionaries that we have today. You've got to get that. You've got to understand that, okay? But that's the romantic fallacy. You can't just be like, well, I feel like a woman, therefore I'm a woman. No, that's not... No. Woman is an adult female human being, which is based off of your reproductive system. And I guess your age, since it means adult, right? Okay. So there's those fallacies. Let's see. We got one more big one, which is the subjectivist fallacy. The subjectivist fallacy is basically saying that which is true for everyone, yeah, it's not true for me. It's not actually true for everyone. In other words, you could say, I am a man who can get pregnant. Not according to the dictionary, you can't. According to the dictionary, now, maybe if you were called a man, or assigned the male, you were determined a male at birth when you were born, but you have some sort of gender mutation which you didn't develop properly in the womb or something, and so you also have a uterus or something. Now that's possible. I'm not going to destroy the exception, right? But no, you can't. As a general rule, a man cannot get pregnant. They do not have the reproductive system for that. Okay? You cannot. Now, if you were, say, if you want to use the word gender in there, now maybe you can do that. Okay? Because now you're actually an adult human female. You're a woman. So you have the reproductive system of a female, right? But because you like being the breadwinner and going out and working really hard, because of that, you're convinced that you're a man. Okay, now that's possible, but you shouldn't be convinced that you're a man just because you like working hard. That's not... Okay, so these are a lot of different fallacies that people operate upon. Some of the more critical ones for the LGBTQ movement are... especially the romantic fallacy, hasty generalization, false equivalence, and the definist's fallacy. Okay? Those are all fallacies that are very critical for that movement. Some of these other ones I mentioned because they're fundamental in it, but they're also fundamental in like every other one, like appeal to authority, destroying the exception, stuff like that. These are fundamental to a lot of things, or they're used in a lot of things. And of course, you can use things like cherry picking and red herring and so forth in any topic. But the ones that I just listed to you, they are very critical for the LGBTQ plus movement because without them, they don't have much to operate upon. I mean, if you can't make up your own definitions for words, you can't do anything. If your feelings, if how you feel doesn't change your gender, yeah, that's kind of going to get blown out of the water. What were the ones that I listed? The definist fallacy, false equivalence. So the who I choose to love, that argument gets thrown away. Hasty generalization and the romantic fallacy. Those are very big ones, which, you could say the subjectivist fallacy also because, reality is not real for me because of my beliefs or because of my how I choose to identify. Like, once you get rid of those fallacies, you get rid of the entire movement. Now, again, I'm not saying that the other side doesn't use fallacies also. They do. They'll appeal to authority, which, again, it's not that appealing to authority is bad. It's just that it's not the best argument in any type of one-on-one setting because of confirmation bias, right? And what have you. But those are the ones that are there. Let me actually show you, just because it's interesting to see how some of these other fallacies are being used. Let me point you to another fallacy or two here, an example of it. This one's called faulty comparison. Okay, I actually ran into this fallacy. But faulty comparison is where you're comparing things that aren't sufficiently related, thus helping to generate appeal or contempt for one of them. So you're comparing like apples to oranges, basically. That's what the faulty comparison is, right? So here was an example, a word-for-word example, mind you, of an LGBTQ plus or favoring person using to support their view. This is what it was. They said, pride is important because somewhere out there is a teenager who thinks that being gay or that being dead might be better than being gay. Okay? Now, there's a lot of things that are better than being dead, right? There's a lot of things that are better than being dead. So why would you compare it to being gay? Well, because being gay will suddenly look really good, right? When compared with death, being gay would be better, right? Well, again, this is comparing apples to oranges, and this isn't fair for the same reason that you shouldn't be comparing sugar and cocaine or heroin, right? Because if you're going to be addicted to one or the other, be addicted to sugar, right? You should be addicted to sugar over heroin. But does that mean you should be addicted to sugar? Is that a good thing? And so in the same way that we should judge being addicted to sugar, that we should not judge being addicted to sugar with being addicted to cocaine or meth or heroin. We shouldn't judge being gay and compare it with being dead. That's not fair. When you do that, I mean, assuming that you could do that, then you come up with this idea that, oh yeah, being the pride, you know, the rainbow thing that the gay people do, oh, it's a good thing. Yeah, it's really, yeah, if you compare it like that. Being addicted to sugar is excellent if you're comparing it with being addicted to meth. But you can't do that. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't, right? So that's faulty comparison for you. Let's see if I had another one. Oh yeah, this was a good one. Suppressed terms. It's very similar to the fallacy of omission, but let me give you suppressed terms here because it's a little bit different. It's actually not the same here. So let's see here. Suppressed terms. Here we go. Now, suppressed terms is an argument or position that suppresses terms or details, thus concealing its true nature. Okay? So, in other words, you're expressing your claim, but and you're expressing all of it, but the terms you're using are kind of like shrouding it a little bit, kind of like concealing the true nature of the position. Okay, so here was an example that I saw. It says, I choose the second grader over the Second Amendment. Now, that's all the information is there, okay? But what second grader obviously is referring to a small child, okay? Second Amendment is obviously referring to our right to bear arms, right? But when we say, I choose the second grader over the Second Amendment, okay, one, we're using a faulty comparison because you shouldn't be comparing those two. That's an apples to oranges thing, the sugar to meth. You can't do that, right? But, so, let's see here. The way that they should express this is, I choose the life of the 7-year-old child over the right to use guns to defend myself and my family from termination should the need arise. That's how they should present it, okay? Because that's a little bit clearer. And when you start doing that, it's like, well, I kind of really value the right to protect my family should the need arise. But I also really value the child too. Then you'll realize, hey, we shouldn't be comparing these things. This was actually not the LGBTQ movement. That's actually the gun debate. But you can use the same thing in there too. So, let's see. Was there another one? Yeah, no, that one. Oh, reification. I actually do need to talk about reification. So, reification. Reification here. Oh, here we go. Reification is regarding something abstract as though it were concrete. In other words, Murphy's Law. Well, what if we started referring to Murphy like he was a real person? That would be something called reification. And you can do this, well, both sides, again, use this, that whether you're LGBTQ, you know, in favor of them or against them, they'll do this, and it's kind of very similar to the distinction without a difference, but they'll be like science teaches that, you know, men and women or the gender's a spectrum. Okay, science doesn't teach anything. Science is what it is, okay? People who interpret science teach that gender is a spectrum, okay? People that interpret science, but science itself is not a teacher. It is not a physical being with a ruler and a chalkboard that says, do you get it? I explained it to you, do you get it? No, science does not do that. Science is just... Well, it depends on which definition you're using, because if you look up the word science, it's going to say the study of the natural universe and stuff like that. But if we're talking to the actual, like, facts of gravity and stuff like that, then science is the facts. But science doesn't teach anything. Humans teach. Humans that study science teach things, okay? So we can't be using reification. I just wanted to cover these things because it's important and critical. Like, I didn't know that these words sex and gender did this. And before I learned all these fallacies, I didn't agree with the position. And I happened to actually notice a lot of the patterns of argument that actually have names. I didn't know they had names before, such as false equivalence and romantic fallacy. I identified it before, I just didn't know it had names. But once you know that it has names and you can pin it down with the definition and give clear examples, everything starts becoming very solidified in your mind. So I wanted to talk about this because if you, regardless of what side you're on, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, hopefully you're on the side that agrees with me because obviously I think I'm right, just like everybody does. And so if you think you're right and the other person's wrong, then, you know, you're just like me because that's normal. That's to be expected. But regardless of what side you are on, I think it's important to know these things because if you don't, you're going to get yourself into a fix. And you're going to be using dumb arguments that you shouldn't be using. And you're going to be confusing people that don't need to be confused. One thing I should actually point out about the whole gender thing is it seems to be impacting a lot of young people. And I think this is for several reasons. One, young people are going through a lot of changes in their anatomy, right? Their body is developing and they feel different feelings. They've never felt these levels of estrogen or testosterone before. And so they feel confused, right? And so when you come along and you start telling people that they can choose to be a different gender or a different sex, I should say, you're going to, like, yes, you can get a lot of young people on board with that because why? They already feel confused. And if you tell them, well, the reason you feel confused is because your body's actually this, or you're genuinely this sex or gender, and society's telling you something different. So that's why you feel confused, because you genuinely are confused because your body's or people are lying to you, right? So and when you're, you know, 16, 17, 18, even 20, I mean, you can fall. It's not that hard to fall for that. Another thing I think that makes young people susceptible to this whole LGBTQ plus thing is that we live in a world of about 8 billion people, okay? And when you live in a world of about 8 billion people and your chances of making a big impact on the world are virtually zero in you know, to all human recollections and calculations, that kind of makes you feel very insignificant and like your life doesn't matter. And what a lot of people want, and which I want too also, you know, it's not a bad thing to want this, is they want to make a positive change in the world. This is a good motive. They want to make a positive change in the world, but they don't feel like that they can really do anything. So what you do is you give young people a cause to fight for that makes them feel like their life matters, their life has meaning and purpose, and they can make a positive change in the world. They're very likely to jump on board with that. Or at least they're more likely to jump on board with that than somebody who's older and isn't so easily influenced by, you know, thoughts of this nature. Older people, they're just like, yeah, I'm going to die soon, I'm going to do what I want, and, you know, I'm not going to worry about everything. But because they're older, they're tired, they don't have as much fight in them. I mean, I've even noticed that, and I'm not even technically that old, even though I feel that way. So, but yeah, you take a young person who's going through all these hormonal changes, they already feel very confused. You tell them that traditional society is lying to them and telling them things that are contrary to their body, and that's why they feel confused. And they already feel like their life means nothing, and they can't make much difference for good in the world, and they really want to. And then you give them this thing, well, hey, you can fight in favor of this whole gender thing and fight against inequality, and you can make a difference, even if not like on a big scale, you can make a difference in your hometown or in your church or in your whatever. You can, and now you gave them something that gives meaning and purpose to their life. Well, I mean, a lot of young people are going to fall for that. And I'm not saying they're falling to it because they're bad people, because I don't think that. I'm saying they're susceptible to, like, it doesn't matter it could be a totally different topic. If you give a young, confused person that wants to feel like their life matters, if you give them a cause to fight for, especially one that makes them feel more at home, I mean, I would want to do that, right? So it's not that they're bad people. It's just that they're susceptible to things that, you know, everybody's susceptible to. So, but I think that's a lot of the reason that this whole LGBTQ thing has kicked on with the kids. Another reason also is because it's being taught in schools as a fact. Gender is a spectrum, and or And then see again, we're using that what is that, equivocation or false equivalence? Because what does that mean? Gender is a spectrum. Does that mean some people really like to be the breadwinners and that's all that they want to do, and then that some people want to be the breadwinners and kind of be like the stay-at-home traditional mom too, or that some people and all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and you can fit kind of like in any niche in there? Because that's absolutely fact. But they'll use the word interchangeably with the word sex and male and female and man and woman, and you can't do that. You cannot do that. It is logically fallacious. Okay? So yeah, I just wanted to put things in a better perspective there for you, because it can be a very confusing topic. And so my advice to the people that are against the LGBTQ movement is, you need to stop destroying the exception. There are genuine people that genuine cases where their body didn't fully develop, in the womb. They suffer what is known as ambiguous genitalia. There is Gueva-Desi's children that you can't, you can assign them a sex at birth, but it may be wrong. Those cases are real and do exist. You need to stop denying it. Okay? You can acknowledge that it's a minority and that that the other side can't use the hasty generalization fallacy on you, but you need to stop ignoring the facts just because it goes you see. The problem is that people feel like if any statement they make on a topic gets knocked down, like these ultimate statements where it's yeah, you either have a penis or a vagina, you're either male or female, there's no exceptions. If somebody comes along like me and knocks that down, people will be like, oh, so you favor the LGBTQ movement and so you're a terrible person. No, I don't favor the LGBTQ. The reason that you think that is because I explained that your argument sucks and you need a better one. But because you can't understand the idea of me just having a problem with the argument and not necessarily the conclusion, you view me as an enemy. And because I knocked down one of your arguments, you think that I must be wrong because your view and your opinion is right. And so if I knocked down your argument, well, I must be using some sort of really messed up psychology on you, and that you just don't know what it is, and so you reject it. And it's no, I'm not using anything weird. I clearly explained it to you. You just got to get out of your narrow box, a narrow way of thinking, so that way you can be a real boy, not be Pinocchio anymore. You can actually be honest with yourself, okay? So that would be my advice. Oh, and my advice to the people who are not in favor of the LGBTQ plus movement: you need to understand the difference between the words sex and gender. And then make sure you're using them properly, or you're going to it's going to cause confusion when talking with anybody, okay? So that's my advice to you. Now, my advice to the LGBTQ plus people: understand your feelings do not change your gender. Your feelings are real and you feel them. If you have a male's reproductive system and you feel like a woman, you feel like a woman. I will never deny that. Why? Because that's how you feel. I have felt that way before. I used to actually be able to control if I felt like a man or a woman. I used to be able to do that when I was even 19, 20, 21. And I had a friend, I talked to him. He's like, yeah, I can control it too. I don't know how we were able to do this, but we were able to do this. I don't know if I'm able to do it anymore. I haven't tried. I have no real reason to. But when I was younger, I could change whether I felt like a male or female just by thinking about it. It was weird, but I could do it. Okay, so I'm not denying that your feelings are real. If you are an adult male with a male's reproductive system and you feel like a woman, then that is how you feel. I'm not going to deny that. To deny that would be stupid. I'm denying that's reality. You feel that way. But you are still a male. Okay, you need to understand that. You also need to understand that words have meanings. You can't make up your own meaning and say that's society standards. You can't have circular definitions either. You need to stop using false equivocation, hasty generalization, the definite fallacy, and the romantic fallacy. Okay, that's my advice. And I just thought I'd clarify all that. I've not talked about this topic really much before because I don't know. I don't know. I don't like talking about much topics anymore because I don't feel like people really care. Usually what it boils down to is they're going to believe what they want to believe, and it doesn't really matter what facts you present. It doesn't matter what arguments you present. doesn't matter anything. They're going to believe what they want to believe, and at the end of the day, you can present all true information. They will not care. Okay, so that's kind of why I don't really like talking so much. But for those who do care, because I'm not going to destroy the exception and say that nobody cares, because some people do. For those that do care, take this stuff into consideration. Go online or message me, and you can get my document that covers about 150 logical fallacies, sinister underhand tactics, and strategies to confuse yourself and to confuse other people. It is awesome. It is clear, simple definitions, clear examples. It'll explain to you how to engage in a debate without using fallacies, not for the sake of debating or arguing, but for the sake of having an intelligent conversation with people, learning, being corrected yourself, and also potentially maybe even being able to correct other people if they are in error. So blessings to you all, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm sorry that I used an example about the gun control debate in there. I don't remember which one it was, suppressed terms. But let's make sure that our terms are clear. There's also another fallacy I didn't cover. It's called political correctness, which is a variation of spin doctoring. And political correctness is basically you're just using a different word. In fact, let's go ahead and do it. You're basically just using a different word to describe something because you feel better about it. Okay, this is political correctness. So behaving as though the nature of a thing is changed by referencing it with different terms. So, for example, with the LGBTQ plus movement, we would normally call them a man. Now we're going to call them a person. Yeah, that's true. That's not as specific, but we're going to call them a person. But the reality is it's still a male person. The nature of the thing didn't change just because you're using a different term. Okay, same thing with the word woman. We want to use the word person now. You can use the word person, but it's still an adult human female with a female reproductive system. So changing the terms used to reference things doesn't change the nature of those things. That's a variation of spin doctoring. But yeah, there's all kinds of goodies in this thing. Get it and learn and be awesome, and you have a great rest of the weekend.